With this baseball salary extra data, we can ask questions and try to answer questions related to the salaries affecting things like were you in the playoffs? Were you in the World Series? Um, does one team spend more than another team? These types of questions. The book recommends using Box-and Whiskers charts, and that's a good idea because that shows distributions and outliers. So let's look at different ways to do that. I'm going to hold down the Control key and select two columns that are not contiguous, that is, they're not next to each other. So I could I could select C and hold down the Control key and select salary, and I've selected these two columns that are separate from one another. And then I can create the Box-and Whiskers chart that's associated with that. And I'll move it over there. And then this shows or helps answer the question, do pitchers make more than other positions? Well, on average, no, they don't, but there are outliers. Let's look at whether one league spends more on salary than another league. There's two leagues, the National and the American. So there's a Box-and Whiskers chart associated with that, and it looks like on average they're about the same, but there are some outliers with the National. And we could do the same thing with divisions. So there's some data by divisions. It looks like the National West has some outliers here and spends maybe a little bit more, but on average they're about the same. Do playoff teams spend more than non-playoff teams? Well, on average, a little bit more, and there are some outliers. So these give you some general ideas about what you can do. Now, you can also filter this data and these charts to filter out some of the data that you're not interested in. So by filtering, I mean I could do home, format as table, and pick some formatting. And yes, the table has headers. And yes, that's fine. And then I might be able to say, well, I'm mainly interested in just the American League. So I'll get rid of that one. And so this data, these charts update. And they also kind of shrink down in size because these rows have, some of them are minimized because of the filtering that I put on there. What you can do sometimes, if you don't like that, is select these charts. I'm going to cut and I'll paste them in a new sheet, and then I can arrange them in some fashion and make them look the way I want to look. And this way, whenever I change the filtering, the relative positions don't change. In other words, if I was to come here and go back to National, then I have all this data, and now this data is updated here. Now we can also use a pivot table, and I think I'll go to, I'll remove this filtering here of the table and create pivot tables and explore some of the data possibilities there. So we're mainly interested in salary, so I'll put salary. There's all the salary. And this salary is money. So the number format is currency and need decimal places. So this is money. That's the only number we've got is money. So I could see position by league, for instance. So there's the money spent for each position by each league. And there's many different ways you can look at this data. And I think I will insert, I'll insert a slicer for position. And I may not use it right now, but I'll use it later. And I'll insert a chart. And I think I'll look at some of these different charts, and one of them you can just sort of go through and get ideas of what they look like. There's a stacked, and there's stacked with percentages, and it just depends on what you're interested in seeing. So there's a typical chart, a column chart. Here's another type of chart that can be interesting, and it's the radar chart. So here's a radar chart, and I think I'll move this down here and make this a little bit bigger and try to make that a little bit bigger and move it down here. And so what this radar chart helps you discover visually, or point out or illustrate visually, is that pictures have the most total salary. So it's like pointing at picture. And if I was to get rid of the picture by holding down the control key, I've removed picture from the slicer, and now the radar chart updates, and it's pointing mostly at first baseman, but I guess also center fielders. And we could insert another column chart is what I'm trying to select. And you can kind of compare how these charts visually present the information. So there's a same data, column chart versus radar chart. I'll put that back in. There, I select all of them. And you can see picture stands out, and here picture stands out. They're just different presentations of the same data.